From my own personal experience, very few people seem to care about their liver, definitely not compared to the heart or the kidneys anyway. And I find that genuinely strange because when you work in medicine, you start to realize that the liver tells you more about somebody's overall health than most people seem to realize. The thing is, other organs give you obvious clues when something goes wrong. If your lungs are struggling, then you get breathless going up the stairs. If your brain starts to malfunction, you notice it in your thinking, in your memory, or your mood. If your kidneys are struggling, then you often see it right there in the toilet. But the liver operates quietly in the background, doing hundreds and hundreds of jobs simultaneously, and it doesn't send out obvious distress signals, at least not in the early stages. Anyway, over the years working in AANDE, I've looked at literally tens of thousands of blood results, and what I can tell you is that your liver markers are almost always correlated with how unhealthy someone is overall. When I'm looking at their full set of bloods, the liver tests are often the first thing that tells me which direction someone's health is going in. Long before they feel seriously unwell, long before anything shows up dramatically, the liver has already started giving subtle hints. And most people, and to be honest, a lot of doctors don't give enough attention to those early signals. So that's what this video is all about. Not end-stage liver disease, not jaundice or liver failure. That's coming in a later video. What we're talking about today is early dysfunction, the kind that's often completely reversible if you catch it in time. And the vast majority of the time, it's tied directly to your metabolic health, specifically to fatty liver disease, which is now the most common liver condition in the world. If you're new here, then welcome to the channel. I'm Dr. Alex. I've worked in the NHS for a decade, and now I'm on a mission to help you avoid the end-stage diseases that I see every day. So before we get into the specific signs, it really helps to just sort of go over what the liver does on any given day, because the breadth of its job is generally quite underappreciated. So your liver essentially filters your blood. Every drop of blood leaving your intestines passes through the liver before it goes anywhere else in the body. It regulates glucose, deciding how much sugar gets stored and how much gets released into circulation. It processes dietary fats and produces bile, which is essential for breaking them down. It produces clotting factors that stop you from bleeding uncontrollably when you get an injury. And it neutralizes toxins, medications, alcohol, and other metabolic waste products. Now that's a lot of functions running simultaneously. So when the liver starts to struggle, particularly when fat begins to accumulate inside the liver cells, which is the earliest stage of metabolic liver disease, all of those systems start to wobble. Not dramatically at first, but very subtly. And that's exactly why these 7 signs matter so much. The first sign on the list today is fatigue. And before you roll your eyes and think, oh, this is just too vague to be useful to me, then just stay with me for a minute, because this is a very specific kind of tide that most people misunderstand. One of the liver's central roles is managing your glycogen stores, which is your body's short-term energy reserve stored in the liver cells and released into the bloodstream when your blood sugar drops. When fat begins to accumulate in those same liver cells, it disrupts the insulin signaling that controls this process. The result is something called hepatic insulin resistance, which is where the liver stops responding properly to insulin instructions. Blood sugar regulation becomes erratic. You get peaks and troughs rather than steady energy throughout the day. And then on top of that, early liver dysfunction tends to generate low-grade systemic inflammation, which in itself is energetically expensive. Your immune system is running slightly hot all the time, quietly burning through resources. The fatigue that comes from all of this isn't the satisfying tired that you feel after a hard workout or a long productive day. It's a background exhaustion that doesn't improve with sleep, and people often describe it as feeling like they're running on 50%, even on days where nothing particularly demanding has happened. Now that mismatch, tired without a clear reason, is a detail worth paying attention to. Moving on to the second sign, which has a metabolic connection that most people aren't aware of. An expanding waistline isn't just about subcutaneous fat, which is the soft fat that you can pinch under the skin. The more clinically significant fat is called visceral fat, and I'm sure I mention this in every video these days. Now that accumulates deep in the abdomen around your organs, and visceral fat and liver fat aren't just sitting next to each other, they're actively driving each other. Visceral fat releases fatty acids directly into the portal circulation, which drains straight into the liver. This is essentially a constant drip of fat into liver tissue, which accelerates the progression of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Research consistently shows that waist circumference is one of the strongest predictors of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, even in people who don't look particularly overweight. You can be a normal body weight on paper and still carry enough visceral fat and liver fat to put you at metabolic risk, a phenomenon called TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside, TOFI. This is why we always prefer waist to height ratio. Your waist in centimeters should be less than half your height in centimeters. So if you're 180 centimeters tall, then your waist should be ideally below 90 centimeters. Again, if you're 160 tall, then it should be less than 80. These numbers aren't just arbitrary, they reflect the point at which visceral fat accumulation starts affecting the function of your organs. The third sign is one that often just gets quietly filed away and forgotten about. And this is mildly raised liver enzymes on a routine blood test, specifically ones called ALT, A and GGGT. Now, most people, when they're told their results are slightly outside normal range, they don't really think much of it. Their doctor might not either, but in a clinical context, mild elevations in these markers, even within what some labs still consider an acceptable range, can be meaningful early signals. ALT, or alanine aminotransferase, is the most liver-specific of these, and it's an enzyme that lives inside your liver cells and only shows up in elevated levels in the blood when those cells are being damaged or stressed. A persistently elevated ALT, even at levels that some guidelines still classify as borderline, is often the earliest biochemical footprint of fatty liver. Gamma-GT, or GGGT, is particularly sensitive to alcohol intake and also rises with oxidative stress inside the liver tissue. The problem is that because these elevations are quite modest, they're easy to dismiss. What I'd say to anyone who's had a blood test showing these results flagged, even mildly, is to not ignore it. Get it rechecked. Ask for a second opinion. Ask for a liver ultrasound if you know, from what you've read, you think that might be necessary. This is where early intervention becomes really powerful. Now, on to a symptom that people often struggle to describe, which is a vague sense of fullness or pressure or a dull ache in the upper right side of the abdomen where your liver is, what we call the right upper quadrant. The liver sits right here tucked under the rib cage and it's covered by this fibrous capsule. Now, with fatty liver disease, fat accumulation enlarges the liver tissue, and as the organ expands, it stretches that capsule. The capsule itself has pain receptors, and when it's under stretch, it produces a dull, non-specific discomfort. This isn't the sharp pain of a kidney stone or appendicitis. It's easy to mistake for digestive bloating, or a pulled muscle, or just general abdominal discomfort. We all get tummy pains every so often. Many people live with this sensation for months and months without connecting it to the liver. And why would they unless a doctor has already made that link for them? The important distinction is whether it's persistent, localized to that right upper area, and associated with any of the other signals on this list. In that context, it then becomes something that's really worth investigating. Number 5 is worsening blood sugar control, and this one sits right at the heart of metabolic health. So the liver is arguably the most important organ in glucose regulation, and I've done a video on this recently if you want to check that out after. So the liver acts as the body's glucose buffer, absorbing excess sugar from the bloodstream after meals and releasing it back when levels drop. When fat infiltrates liver cells, that regulation breaks down. The liver then becomes resistant to insulin, which means it keeps releasing glucose into the blood even when levels are already high, something that we call inappropriate hepatic glucose output. The downstream effect is that blood sugar starts running chronically higher. You might notice your HbA1c, which is a 3-month average of your blood sugar, creeping up on your annual blood tests if you have them. You might feel more tired after meals or notice stronger sugar cravings as your body tries to compensate for the energy instability. This is the metabolic trajectory towards type 2 diabetes, and the liver is often where that trajectory begins. Moving on to something slightly less obvious now, which is changes in your appetite and how quickly you feel full. So low-grade liver inflammation interferes with the normal hormonal signals that regulate hunger and satiety, particularly ones called leptin and ghrelin. An enlarged liver can also physically compress the stomach, creating a genuine mechanical reason for early fullness. The result is that meals that used to feel normal now feel overwhelming after just a few bites, or the thought of eating, particularly in the morning, doesn't really feel that appealing anymore. This isn't the same as intentional intermittent fasting, or simply not being a breakfast person. It's a shift in your baseline appetite that happens gradually, and it tends to be noticed more clearly in retrospect. The 7th sign on the list today, and one that probably gets blamed on everything else first, is nausea or general digestive discomfort after eating fatty or rich meals. And here's why it happens. So your liver produces bile, which I mentioned earlier, which gets stored in the gallbladder, and bile is what your body uses to break down dietary fat. When the liver isn't functioning well, that whole process becomes sluggish. Fatty meals don't get processed properly, and what follows is that familiar post-meal heaviness, like bloating, nausea, just feeling off for a couple of hours after eating. Most people assume they've got a sensitive stomach, or maybe IBS, or that they just don't agree with certain foods anymore. And sometimes that's genuinely all this is. But when this keeps happening alongside some of the other signs we've already covered, it stops looking like a food intolerance and starts fitting into a much clearer metabolic picture. Let me just end with something practical, because I know that watching a video like this and then not knowing what to do is quite frustrating, and I've probably worried quite a few of you watching it. So we all know how hard it is to get a GP appointment these days. But if something in this video has resonated with you, if you've recognized symptoms that you've been quietly dismissing for months or years, then you need to push for that appointment. Ask specifically for some baseline blood tests like liver enzymes, fasting glucose, lipids, the full picture. If your GP won't do it or the wait is too long, then consider going private. I know that's not what everybody wants to hear, but think about it this way. As a country, we spend billions a year on supplements or health foods, a lot of which have very little evidence behind them. A private blood test that actually tells you what's going on inside your body is arguably one of the best ways that you could spend that money. It's clearly obviously not the solution to the problems in the NHS, and I don't get any money suggesting this, but it could help your individual situation. And increasingly people are doing exactly that. Annual private checkups, just to keep an eye on their numbers and their health. It's not something that everyone needs to do, and catching things incidentally is a separate conversation, but the option is there. The wider point for this video is this: don't put vague symptoms down to just getting older, especially if you're not actually that old. If any of these signs sound familiar, then a doctor needs to sit down with you. They need to take a proper history, ask about your lifestyle, and examine you. Put hands on your belly, not just glance at one blood test and then send you home. And definitely not just a telephone consultation for something like this. But here's the genuinely good news about all of this. Unlike most organs, the liver has a remarkable capacity to recover, particularly at this early stage before anything serious has set in. Studies consistently show that losing just 5 to 10% of your body weight produces measurable reductions in liver fat, and in some cases completely normalizes liver enzyme levels. It's not a dramatic amount of weight, and it's achievable for most people. And the interventions with the strongest evidence behind them are honestly not complicated. It's cutting back on ultra-processed food, reducing alcohol, improving your sleep, and increasing your fiber intake, which feeds the gut bacteria that reduce inflammation in the liver itself. This isn't a hopeless situation for most people watching this. If any of these 7 signs have resonated, then what you're looking at is a metabolic wake-up call. It's not a diagnosis necessarily. The liver is quietly sending you information right now, and that information is something that you can act on. And the earlier that you act, the better the outcome.